Love, which is not an emotion, but is willing the good of the other, is like the hardest thing in the world, because it means you got to break out of the little shell of your egotism. And most of us live our lives that way. We live in the little shell, and we relate to others in the measure they don't threaten us too much. To love is to break out of that shell and say, it's not my needs that matter, it's your good. And that's a very rare thing, which is why we call love a theological virtue. It means you can't practice it really, you can't grow into it. It's something given to you. It breaks through like a grace. And then it transforms the whole of your life though. Once you get that, then everything changes. If you wake up in the morning and say, my purpose today is not, well, what's going to make me more famous, more wealthy, more powerful, better liked? If those aren't my questions, but rather, how can I act in such a way that the good of others is realized? Your whole life will change. That's what Jesus means by being born again. That's what it means to find the treasure buried in the field. That's the pearl of great price. That's what he means by conversion, metanoia. Go beyond the mind you have. Don't see the world in a customary way, but see it now in this transformed way. That's the strangest, oddest, most surprising thing. That's why we call it grace. Grace, it's a gift, it breaks through. And so yes, love is the hardest thing, the strangest thing, the most surprising thing, and the best thing. The very heart of the spiritual life is charity or love, for love is what God is. When the human will is rightly ordered to God, it marvelously expands. What does this look like concretely? First, we should refrain from judging one another and leave judgment completely to God. Whether someone is saved or lost is finally none of our business. Rather, our business is to act for everyone's good. Second, we should pray and work for the salvation of all. Third, we should never seek any reward or recompense for our love. For love is willing the good of the other, period. There's a terrible corollary to this law of love. It's the law of suffering. Since love is the surrender of self, it will always involve a certain pain of loss. Suffering and sorrow increase in proportion to love. When love grows, so does sorrow. Christians, of course, readily recognize this as a participation in the crucifixion of Jesus, which was the supreme act of love. It is true in Christian spirituality and theology. Real proximity to God, real participation in God's life requires the cross. You look at the great saints. There are two things they all have in common, despite their differences across culture, across time. They love the Eucharist and they love the cross. Now, it just sounds like some kind of weird masochism or obsession with suffering. It's not that, it's not that. But Christian spirituality would say the best way into the life of God is to commune with the Son of God. And the Son of God, at the culmination of his life, suffered on the cross. So that's the basic principle. Now, why? What's the why behind it? It has a lot to do with death to the ego. So to love God, that means with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind. That means you've got to get rid of self-love. You have to get rid of your preoccupation with your own projects, your own plans, your own life. And so what you see in the Bible, and you see it in all the great Christian mystics, is a steady stripping away of my self-preoccupation, my self-love. And that always involves suffering. Not sometimes, not usually, always. So it's not God being cruel, it's not our becoming masochistic. It's a simple acceptance of the fact that ridding oneself of self-love is always painful. And so the turning toward God, especially in a sinful world, so a world that's already kind of twisted by sin, it's especially painful to turn away from the self toward God. And that's why you find the cross in all the great Christian mystics. We are either moving forward in appropriating the divine love, or we're moving backward. This is why the soul can never be content with the level of union it has attained. Rather, it should always be restlessly seeking. The key is the death of the selfish will and the emergence of the will that's identical with the divine will.